Absolutely, we have a special guest. This special guest is Archbishop of Telmessos, Job Getcha, and we can call him Job, Archbishop Job. So what a privilege to have you. You are with Zoom from Paris. Welcome.
Thank you. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed, absolutely. This is the formula that the Orthodox are using worldwide when it is Easter, because for you guys, Easter will be in about a month. We're going to talk about that. So, dear Archbishop Job, could you tell us why the resurrection is so important in the Orthodox Church and for you personally?
Well, the Orthodox Church, which claims to be faithful to its tradition through the 2,000 years of history of Christianity, to be faithful from the experience of the very first apostles of Christ, remembers very well the words of St. Paul the Apostle in his first epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 15, verse 14. If Christ is not risen, then our preaching is worthless and your faith is worthless. In the Orthodox Church, the faith in the risen one, in the risen Christ, is the very foundation of our belief, of our Christian life. And this is why the resurrection, actually the feast of Pascha, as we call the Easter, is really the feast of feasts. It's really the center of the liturgical year. All the life of the Christian, all the life of the faithful, of the believer, is based on that experience, on that faith, on that celebration. Actually, this greeting that we share, Christ is risen, is the way we greet each other, not only on the day of Easter, but also throughout the period, the Paschal period, which goes until Pentecost. But we have a holy man who lived in Russia in the 19th century. His name is Saint Seraphim of Sarov. He claimed that Christians should greet each other this way throughout the year. And actually, when he greeted people throughout the year, he used to say, when encountering someone, he used to say, "My joy, Christ is risen."
Beautiful.
For me personally, the resurrection of Christ gives me not only a meaning, not only an orientation to my life, but also gives me hope. For us Orthodox, the resurrection is connected to the crucifixion. Sure. The cross and the empty tomb are not separable. Absolutely. It's like two faces of a coin. And therefore, when we encounter the risen one, we actually encounter the crucified one. Remember, when the risen Christ appears to Thomas, what does he say to Thomas? He says, "Look at my wounds. Put your hand in my wound that was here on my right side, and not be unbeliever, but believe." For us, all the trials that we encounter in life, temptations, difficulties, illness, or even death, are always healed by this belief in the resurrection, because we believe that after these trials will come the resurrection. After this temporal life, we will have access to the eternal life through the gift which is given to us through the risen one.
Thank you, Archbishop. You've touched upon this in your last answer when you said that resurrection means hope to you personally. So what is that meaning, and how does it impact your everyday life, what the resurrection is?
Well, as I said, each time when I encounter any trial, because life is never easy, We go through many difficulties in our life at different level, on a personal level, on a family level, or also trials as a society, as a global society. For example, the world has been impacted now throughout 1 year through this terrible pandemic, which has generated illness and also caused the death of millions of people. Well, all these trials are being transfigured, transformed through our hope in the resurrection. We know that death is not the final word
Yes.
in this world, that suffering is not the end of our life, but something else, something better awaits us after. The Christian, and this is something we believe, not only we believe, but this is something we live throughout our earthly life. The Christian, in the Orthodox perspective, is someone who waits, someone who awaits the resurrection.
Wow, it's beautifully said. And I need to remember all the time that I meet you or someone from the Orthodox Church to say, Christ is risen, and wait for the answer, even
He
if
is
it's
truly
not
risen.
not even if it's in the season of Easter. So thank you for reminding us the centrality of the resurrection in our faith in general, Christian, as Paul said in the Bible, but also especially on the Orthodox liturgy and Orthodox practice. I have another question for you. This year is quite specific. We have few weeks of difference between Occidental Easter and Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox Easter. So how come that we have so many weeks and not on the date? That's not exactly my question, but you have mentioned an article just on your newsletter, personal newsletter, and it went a bit viral the last few days. The Vatican took that and other literature and websites. Tell us about what was the question that rose so much interrogation and manifestation in newspaper?
Yes, it's true that not every year all Christians do not celebrate Easter on the same date. Sometimes we do celebrate it, fortunately, on the same date, but sometimes there's a 1 week difference, and this year we have 1 month difference. The reason is because the Orthodox use the Julian calendar to determine the date of Pascha, of Easter. And at the moment, the Julian calendar has 13 days delay. And as you know, Easter is not a fixed celebration. Every year it varies. Because it's the Sunday which follows the full moon after the spring equinox. And depending when the full moon falls and how do you determine the spring equinox, well, we will have a different date.
Sure.
And because we use the Julian calendar, the full moon, which was a few days ago, you should have observed it.
It was beautiful.
Was according to the Julian calendar, was not the full moon of the spring, because spring will start in a few days.
Yeah.
On the third. Spring was actually today, and
Okay.
according to the Julian calendar, and we have to wait the next full moon for the celebration of Eastern Pascha. Nevertheless, you see, this Julian calendar does not correspond to the reality, to the astronomic reality, and the decision of the Council of Nicaea in 325, at the beginning of the 4th century, was actually looking at astronomic data. And I wrote an article a few weeks ago stating that in 2025 we will celebrate the 1,700 years of the Council of Nicaea.
Wow.
And perhaps this would be a good occasion to look to reflect what we are actually doing, and try to be faithful, remain faithful not only to the principle of Nicaea, but also to, it would be a good occasion to consider a reformation of the calendar that would be more accurate to the astronomic data. There were in the Orthodox Church, this was already, it's not something new, because already in 1902, at the beginning of the last century, the Patriarch of Constantinople, Joachim III, suggested that Orthodox should consider the possibility of have a more accurate calendar. And the same was suggested by the encyclical of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople of 1920, calling all the Christian churches everywhere, not only to form a society of churches, which would become later the famous World Council of Churches,
Correct.
but was also calling for a common calendar, was also calling for a common celebration of all Christian feasts. So this was in mind already for one century.
Absolutely.
And in 1977, in Geneva, in Chambézy, we had a meeting of Orthodox astronomers in order to prepare reform of the calendar, and also a reform for the dates of Pascha. Unfortunately, up to this day, no official decision was made by the fullness of the Orthodox Church. For that, we would need to gather in a council. We had a council in 2016, but some Orthodox suggested not to discuss this question because they feel that people were not enough prepared. And I have also to mention that the World Council of Churches in 1997 in Aleppo also reflected on a common date for Pascha, and they suggested to remain faithful to the principle that was formulated at the Council of Nicaea, but to use the most accurate astronomic data of today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those thoughts. And yeah,
Thank you very
what should we
much,
do?
Archbishop. I hadn't myself realized there was such a time difference between how Christians celebrate the Easter, and I think that we would call upon all our viewers to show curiosity and interest and see how other churches are celebrating Easter at this time.